Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to Next Door NetAdmin. Last week, I walked us through the fact that Microsoft includes extra software in its default installation image for Windows 11 these days. And I also walked us through what we can do about it, how we can actually open the installation image and then remove some of those AppX provisioned packages so that they never install at all in the first place. But something you may have noticed about that is the only apps that were included there were Microsoft's own apps. You didn't see anything from other companies like Spotify, or you didn't see Candy Crush or any of the other stuff. All you saw as provisioned packages were Microsoft's own applications. And yes, that includes things that we don't need and don't have a desire for, like Bing News, Bing Weather, Windows Maps, all that stuff. But it's only part of the story. So, how do these other apps just show up out of the box when we do a brand new installation of Windows? Well, for reasons only known to them, Microsoft has included functionality that can download and automatically install suggested apps. And this happens anytime they put new suggested apps out there, which is why when you first install a computer, you might get a different set of apps. Later on, say after a Windows update, you might suddenly find that you have different new apps showing up. And certainly me, the first time I saw this, I went, why has Windows included these apps in a Windows update? They didn't. It's a change to the suggested apps. And then it downloaded and installed those automatically. I hate that. I really, really hate that. I choose what gets installed on my PC, okay? Not automatically installed suggested apps. I'm not the only person with that perspective. Say you're a large customer of Microsoft's and you're installing Windows across thousands of machines. Say like, the US Department of Defense. You think they're gonna be okay with Microsoft pushing suggested apps into the network on Microsoft's say-so? No, not gonna happen. So Microsoft has to have a way made available where this kind of behavior can be disabled. And then it won't do this anymore. And it's made available by Microsoft specifically for those instances where large businesses with a well-staffed IT team can go in and, tweak things and say, okay, well, we're going to disable this default behavior and we're going to disable this default behavior so that, something like the US Department of Defense can use this software without risking any security breaches or going without review, etc. But how do we do this? Where are these settings even saved? Like, finding this in a control panel is almost impossible to some extent. And by the time you find it, the damage is already done. Because this is a default setting, it starts the moment you log in for the very first time. Microsoft is already downloading these things and installing them without your permission. So how do we do this? Again, the solution is to make the changes to your installation image so that when you install it, it's already in a disabled state. But whereas removing a provisioned package is relatively simple, you just mount the image, find the ones you want to remove, tell it to remove it, and then commit the changes. These settings are saved in a registry. Now, if you're familiar at all with the Windows registry, you know that it can be a little difficult to navigate. And you may or may not know that, well, I'll look at it this way. When you open Registry Editor, you see a bunch of sections in there. Stuff like HKey local machine, HKey current user, HKey users. Okay, fine. This just appears when you open the registry. How do you open the registry of an image that isn't actually running? Do you just point Registry Editor at the path like you did with the command for removing AppX provisioned packages? No, sadly no. The registry itself is actually saved in specific files within any Windows installation, really, including the one that you're running right now. And these sections are also called hives. So when we talk about loading and unloading registry hives, we're talking about loading these files into and out of the registry. And that's actually something that happens. If you are logged in as user A, well, it's not going to change anything about HKey local machine, but HKey current user now has to reference the registry specific to user A. And if user A logs out and user B logs in, then suddenly HKey current user is referencing the registry for user B. So users have their own individual registry hives containing user-specific settings. I say this because similar to how an AppX provisioned package installs individually for each user, and then each user has to go in and uninstall it separately, these settings for downloading suggested apps are also user-specific. Which means if you change the setting for yourself, it's not going to take effect for anybody else who logs on to the PC. Everybody else is going to get the suggested apps. So just like we have to customize this setting, how do we do this? We need a way to customize this for every single user who's going to log in here. There is a hidden user folder called default within the Windows image, and it has a user hive in it. When a new user is created and logs in for the first time, this default user profile, including the registry, is then copied over and set up for the new user. So if we want to change this behavior for every user who's ever going to log in to this machine, we need to mount the installation image. We need to load the registry hive for the default user. And then we need to insert a bunch of settings to disable this behavior of downloading whatever suggested apps Windows wants. And we're going to need to save that, and then we're going to unload that hive, and then we're going to be able to dismount our image, unmount it, and that will mean that when we install Windows, the setting to not download these suggested apps will be in as a default. And then every new user that's created will have this default setting of, don't give me these suggested apps, I don't want them. Now, exactly which settings we're going to touch, there's a whole pile of them. I'm only going to demonstrate one for the sake of brevity. But just like with the removing of the AppX provisioned packages, there's more that we're going to be able to apply as we go through. And as we go through and I actually walk through the entire process of creating a clean Windows 11 installation image, you're going to see more and more of these keys appear. So, explanation over, why don't we go over and I'll actually demonstrate it. All right, and here we are on my development machine again. I've already gone and we're going to reuse the install-custom.wim that we used last week, but I've already gone and mounted it. Again, I'm using the c:\mount directory on my machine to host this installation image. Then we're going to go into the registry editor. And when you first load Registry Editor, this is what you'll typically see. You've got the root context of computer. That's this computer, not the image. We need to tell it to reference the image and load part of that image's hives so that we can access it. Now, if you go to File, you'll see there's an option for Load Hive, but it's not active. We can't click on it. Why is this? Well, you are not able to add a hive directly to the computer context. To do that, you need to go into one of these other hives, and typically you could suggest either HKey users or HKey local machine. I'm going to use HKey local machine for this. If you click on it and then go to File, you'll see that Load Hive is now available as an option. So if we click that, we do want to go to the C drive. We're going to go into the Mount directory because that's where I have the installation image mounted. We're going to go into Users. You can see that I've got hidden files and folders set to visible. So I can see that there's a hidden folder here named Default. So if I open Default, then there's an ntuser.dat. This is the user registry hive for the default user within our installation image. So if you click on that and go open, it says, what do you want to call it? You actually have to specify what you are mounting it as because that's how the registry works. To make it easily distinguishable from the others, you can often see it prefixed with something like a Z or a dash or something like that. And then I'm just going to literally call it by the name of the file which hosts it, which is ntuser. If I do that, bingo, now I have a zntuser, and this has all the registry settings contained within that default user ntuser.dat. And in this case, I'm going to go to Software, Microsoft. I'm going to go to Windows, current version, and here is Content Delivery Manager. And look at some of the stuff we have in here. I have not modified this yet. I'm about to, but look at what the default settings are. OEM pre-installed apps enabled. Pre-installed apps enabled. It's a separate thing, okay. Silent installed apps enabled. Is this stuff that we want? Probably not. This is the stuff that we can customize. So for example, I could double click on pre-installed apps enabled, and I can just set that value to 0. Great. Now it's disabled. OEM pre-installed apps enabled? No, thank you very much. Going to have that disabled too. Silent installed apps enabled? No, thank you very much. Not a thing. System pane suggestions enabled? No, I don't need your suggestions. Thank you very much. Cool. I don't mind having a rotating picture on the lock screen. And to some extent, I don't think I mind the screen overlay. But you could change those settings by default if you wanted to. My focus in this is mainly to prevent the installation of other apps and to remove as much of the clutter as I can. If you want to change the rotating lock screen or the screen overlay, you have the total freedom to do that. You can also leave it as something that can be specific to each user, so that maybe one user likes the picture changing, maybe one doesn't. These are just going to be default settings that will be set for users as they log on and use the machine. So I try to keep my changes as tightly focused as possible because there's only the one thing that I want to worry about, and that is Microsoft downloading additional stuff to my computer that I didn't ask for. There's lots of other places that you can tweak things. If you open Content Delivery Manager, for example, you can see that there's a folder for subscriptions. Fortunately, subscriptions doesn't have anything in it by default.
That's good. I don't want there to be any subscriptions out of the box. But if there were, you could theoretically delete them and get rid of them before you even installed the system. There's lots of these little tweakable settings throughout the whole image. And like I said, I'm not going to go through literally all of them, but there are lists that people have. They often include these settings just as a start. And then there's more that you can also add. When I go through and do the entire process from start to finish, we'll see that. But that's for a future video. This one's just introducing the concept. Something else that I will note is that you do not have to use this graphical registry editor to do it. And in fact, in a command line environment, you would just use actual commands. There's a command, for example, reg add will add a value to your registry. You can do reg load to load a hive or unload a hive for reg unload, things like that. But when you're all done in a graphical tool, you can go back, make sure your ZNT user is highlighted. Then you can go to File, Unload Hive is an option. So if you hit Unload Hive, are you sure you want to unload it? Yep. Boom, gone. And that's the end of that. But if you minimize that, let's open up another File Explorer window, go into Local Disk, Mount, Users, Default. We can see that ntuser.dat has been updated and now has a new modification time. It's got the values that we put in there. Cool. Wonderful. So now that we have that, we should be able to go in and just, we don't want to discard that. We do need to make sure that everything has been successfully unmounted first, that we don't have that loaded. Because if we don't have it unloaded, we're definitely going to run into problems with unmounting it like I had last week. And I'd really like to avoid doing that twice in a row if I can. But it'll go through, it'll find the changes, save the changes, put those changes into our installation image, and then, same as I would always do, once I've finished making modifications, I would go in and just like last week, I would export the image to a new image file to reduce the chances of cumulative changes causing corruption within the image file. Because if that happens, then I can't use it at all, and that really sucks. You don't have to do this step by step, mounting and unmounting every time. It is entirely possible to just mount the image, do a whole bunch of work at once, removing Apex provisioned packages, making modifications to the registry, and then unmounting it and saving it once you've made all those changes. I'm really only mounting and unmounting this each time for the sake of demonstrating each part individually through individual videos. When we actually go through and do the full process from start to finish, there won't be all of that in there. It'll be one mount, it'll be a bunch of changes, it'll be one unmount, and then we'll do one export at the end to just export everything clean that we've done, and that'll be good enough. So now we can see it's saving the image. Great. And then it'll unmount the image, and that'll be the end of that. I'm not going to go through and do the export live while we're doing this recording this time because I already showed you that last week, and it would be much the same process. But I will say that when you do another export, every time you do an export, you should be using a new file name. So because I was working with install-custom this time, I would export to install-custom 2. Why? Well, if you export an image to a file that already exists, you're creating a second installation image within that particular file. Remember how our original Windows installation image had 11 editions in there? Home, Home N, Pro, Pro N, Pro for workstations, etc. You can do that and have multiple editions or images within a single file. But that's not really what you want, because you're not getting a proper clean copy then. So when I'm doing modifications, every time I do an export, I'm exporting it to a fresh file name, and then I can rename it however I want, and it'll just work fine that way. Almost done with our unmount here. Anytime now. It goes slowest when it knows you want to be done with it. But that's pretty much all that I have for you. I know this one was a little shorter because we're only talking about loading a registry, modifying it, and then unloading it again. But that's as simple as it is. The real catch, like I said, is knowing what bits and pieces you need to toggle. And it says it can't be unmounted again. Okay, well, perhaps I need to fully close that particular. Yeah, and I only have the one window open. Okay. Well, with discard. Okay, cool. There we go. I didn't want to do that twice in a row, but apparently I have. Like I said before, even the professionals sometimes run into these issues, but it doesn't have to get in your way. Okay. Egg on my face. Oh well.
Well, that didn't quite go the way that I wanted it to at the end, but oh well, these things happen. The best laid plans of mice and men and all that. But hopefully, the information about being able to mount a registry file, even from an installation image, and customize the information in it before you actually install the system is still useful to you. And it's definitely going to come up again as we continue with this process of making a Windows image that is clean to our specifications. So far, we've covered removing pre-provisioned packages within the image. We've covered disabling certain features with the registry to make sure that it doesn't download additional apps as soon as it has an internet connection. But there are still additional settings that we can customize when we do an installation image. So next week, I'm going to walk us through setting up those additional settings using a third method. Yes, there's a lot of ways to do this, but you need to be somewhat versed in all of them so that you can get them all working together to get a really, really nice result. So, something to look forward to as we continue this journey. But for now, hopefully you found that interesting. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to let me know down in the comments. Otherwise, for now, I am your next door netadmin, and we will see you next time.